Would you be able to stay calm if, all of a sudden, everything that represents security in your life became a threat in a matter of minutes? Sometimes, all it takes is a sideways glance, a name said out loud at the wrong time, to completely change the course of an entire city. I always believed that Riverstone was a place where respect and courage spoke louder. But that day, I felt the danger as close as I could on the battlefield. I can still hear the sound of the engines. I remember the feeling of being surrounded, the faces of each of them waiting for me to lower my head. In a few minutes, fear took shape, and each second seemed to push the city to a limit where no one wanted to be. But for you to understand how I got to this point, I need to go back to the beginning. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was born on October 8, 1933, in a small house on the outskirts of Riverstone, near the intersection of Maple Avenue and Pine Street. My father was a mechanic in Old Harold's shop, and my mother taught neighborhood kids. I grew up surrounded by tools, the smell of grease, and the noise of engines. At the age of 9, I was already taking apart tractor carburetors. When I was 18, I was accepted into the Texas State Aviation Academy. The world was still scarred by World War II, and joining the Army was all I wanted, despite the dirty looks from those who said that flying was a man's thing. My first flights in UH-1 Huey helicopters began in 1954. I never forgot the sound of the rotor spinning at 320 RPM right above my head. The wind, the heat, the smell of fuel mixed with sweat. When I arrived in Vietnam in 1968, at the age of 35, I already knew every screw and bolt on that helicopter. I earned my first merit badge after transporting 6 wounded men during a stormy night with no headlights and a radio that was failing. I learned that the difference between landing in one piece and returning in a metal coffin was in seconds, quick decisions, and trusting the equipment. I always carried with me an old pocket watch that my mother had given me before I embarked. It stayed with me on every mission, and to this day, it is kept in the back of my drawer. I met Frank Wallace in 1972, on May 15th, during a rescue that everyone thought was impossible. His radio had stopped working, and the helicopter was trapped in an enemy zone. I had to land 30 meters above the ground, under heavy fire, not knowing if the fuel would last. He never talked about that moment, but he always treated me as if I owed him. After the war, we went our separate ways. I married Andrew Carter, a mechanic like my father, and we set up shop together on Willow Avenue. We had 2 children, Laura and Benjamin, who now live in Seattle. Andrew died in 2008 on an ordinary afternoon while changing a truck engine. After that, I became even more attached to the shop, which became a meeting place for half the veterans in town. It was where we fixed everything, from old cars to broken church chairs. I was never much of a talker, but I liked to hear the stories of those who came in, every scar, every loss, every memory that the war left behind. My neighbors have always treated me with respect, perhaps because they know what I've been capable of doing in places no one would ever dream of seeing. But I've never liked to show off or count medals. I keep all that stuff in the back of a drawer, next to my watch, because medals don't buy respect. It's earned day after day, in the workshop, at church, in line at the grocery store. I've never thought I was better than anyone else. I've just tried to do my part without expecting thanks. I've never given up easily, and I've always thought that life was a different kind of fight, a quieter one. There's no manual for fixing what life breaks inside. What kept me going all these years was knowing that, despite everything, I could still help someone, even if it was just changing the oil in a car or listening to someone who had no one else to talk to. Except that, looking back now, I realized that all that past was just training. I thought I knew what fear was, until that day. In Riverstone, the days start early. Most mornings, I wake up before 6, brew coffee on the cast iron stove in the kitchen, and take the mug out onto the porch. I like to watch the slow hustle and bustle of Main Street when the shops are still closed and the air smells like grass cut from the baseball field. Around here, almost everyone calls me Evie. If I go downtown, I always run into a familiar face. The people at Miller's Grocery ask me what's new. The mailman Walter always delivers the mail with a joke at the ready. And on Saturdays, I'm the one who manages the cash register at the little market next to the church. I've been taking care of my car since 2009, an olive green Dodge that I bought from the city when they changed their fleet. I change the oil every 4 months, check the radiator when the May heat starts, and if there's a strange noise, I don't stop until I find the cause. I often say that everything can be fixed if we pay attention to the details, including relationships between people. In the garage, I keep an eye on everyone so that no one gets hurt, even if it's just the neighbor's grandchildren playing among the toolboxes. I don't go a weekend without visiting Mr. Levin's newsstand, which is on the corner of Market Street and Pine Avenue, because he always saves the Sunday edition of the Times for me. I like to go shopping right afterward, to make sure I get fresh bread from Clarice's bakery. I follow the routine of writing down every expense in a red-covered notebook that I keep on the kitchen counter, just like my mother did in the 1950s. At the hair salon, Mrs. Ruth asks me for advice for her granddaughter. At the pharmacy, the pharmacist Thomas always sets aside a small bottle of eye drops for me, since the April wind makes my eyes sting. Those who know me say that I like to solve things on my own, but I have learned to ask for help when I need it. Last Tuesday, I wasted 20 minutes in line at the bank because the PIN machine froze and no one could withdraw money. I heard the entire story of the account manager's divorce without asking anything, just listening while I marked the month's checks. Riverstone feels like a place frozen in time. From Monday to Friday, the town radio plays classics from the 70s and broadcasts the scores of high school games. On Sundays, half the population attends the 9 o'clock mass, and people often meet up in the square afterwards to discuss the news or just laugh at the children running around. Even those who have lived here for a short time end up getting a taste for the rhythm. The library on Maple Avenue has been open since 1952, and Mrs. Hazel always finds a book to recommend, even if it's just for those who want to distract themselves from the world. But lately, the conversation has changed. The presence of the shadow vipers has changed the way people walk on the streets. I can see it in the smallest details. People lock their car doors, they avoid walking near the abandoned warehouse on Cedar Road, and teenagers no longer hang out on the corner chatting after sunset. People who grew up in Riverstone never had to look over their shoulder for fear of being followed. But now, even Mrs. Marlene, who is over 80 and has never missed a day of church, has started leaving her house only in the morning. Even though no one talks about it out loud, there is this climate of forced caution. The shadow vipers ride their motorcycles slowly all the time. They have stopped greeting each other at traffic lights and have started to ignore basic traffic rules, as if they knew no one would dare confront them. It is strange to see how the whole city is adapting, how old bowling buddies start to play less, how the scout group has shrunk by almost half after one of them saw the vipers fighting in front of the ice cream shop. There are nights when I close the windows a little earlier, not because I think something bad is going to happen, but because the silence between 8 and 9 o'clock has become a kind of warning. There is something wrong when even the neighbor's dog barks less. Behind the custom of greeting everyone by name and helping at the market, there grew a care that no one liked to admit out loud. No one wanted to believe that Riverstone could change so much, but it only took one summer for everything to become quieter, more tense, and emptier. The funny thing is that even though I realized that things were different, I kept going at my own pace. I kept going to the workshop every day, answering people's questions at the market, and trying not to think too much about everything that seemed out of place. Everything I've told you so far was just routine, a normal life trying to resist the changes that were sneaking up on you, taking over every corner, every conversation. Now tell me, how would you react if fear started to take hold in your city, even changing the way people look at you? Write in the comments what your reaction would be. Would you face the risk head on, or would you try to protect yourself, waiting for everything to pass? And that was just the beginning of the nightmare that was etched in my memory forever. Tuesday morning started out like any other. I left home before 7, taking the Dodge to fill up at the gas station on the corner of Main Street and Willow Avenue. The sun hadn't even broken through the fog yet, and all I could see were the silhouettes of the warehouses across the street. The city was slowly waking up, with the smell of bread baking at Clarice's bakery and the first customers arriving for coffee at Billy's. I parked next to gas pump number 2, turned off the engine, and left the keys on the dashboard, as I'd done since I bought the car. I took $20 from my wallet and held it in my hand while the attendant adjusted the hose. In the background, I could hear the sound of motorcycles approaching, but I tried to ignore it. In the last few weeks, seeing the shadow vipers passing by had become almost routine, even if no one had mentioned it directly. This time, they didn't just pass by. 5 motorcycles stopped in front of the gas station. Reaper, the leader, got off first. He looked like he never learned how to apologize. He looked at me without looking away. The others stood around, pretending to talk, but watching my every move. Reaper approached slowly. The smell of gasoline mixed with the leather of his jacket made me want to get out of there, but I didn't give him any space. He made a joke about how easy it was for old people to hide behind medals and old stories. I kept my eyes fixed on him. I didn't respond. I didn't give anyone a reason to fight. I just wanted to finish filling up, pay the attendant, and get back to my routine. He insisted, spoke louder, made it clear to everyone at the gas station that he didn't respect anyone there. When I went to put the change in my wallet, he pushed my shoulder hard, trying to get me out of the way. I felt his hand tighten on my arm, and the impact threw me against the side of the car. My elbow hit the door hard. I dropped the money on the floor, and it took me a few seconds to react. The gas station went silent. All I could hear was the sound of one of the motorcycles still running. I looked around and realized that no one knew what to do. The employees stood there, their mouths half open, unable to decide whether it was better to help me or pretend they hadn't seen anything. I stood up, feeling my arm throb. I picked up the money from the floor, put the change away, and faced Reaper again. The anger I felt wasn't just for myself, but for every single person there. The way he acted made it clear that he thought he could do anything. No one did anything. No words of support, no protests, just that uncomfortable silence. Even those who were used to my presence avoided my gaze, as if sharing the shame would lessen the embarrassment. I left slowly, without rushing, without showing any hurry. I got in the car and closed the door, being careful not to hurt my arm anymore. I took a deep breath before turning the key in the ignition, trying to control the tremor in my left hand. At home, I dropped my bag on the kitchen table and sat down, staring at the clock on the wall. It read 8:15 in the morning. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange weakness in my legs. I thought about calling my daughter, but I knew she would worry and be helpless. I looked at the old picture of Andrew on the dresser, closed my eyes, and held the pocket watch between my fingers. This was all bigger than just a bad day. Deep down, I understood that fear wouldn't go away if we pretended it wasn't there. I picked up the landline and dialed Frank Wallace's number, the old Minneapolis area code I'd never forgotten. He picked up on the second ring. I didn't have to say much. My voice was quieter than I would have liked, but he could tell from the silence. "Frank, I need you here. I'm not exaggerating. I'm serious." He didn't ask for details. He didn't want to know who the target was. He just asked, "Are you okay?" I said yes, or at least I tried to sound convincing. On the other end of the line, he took a deep breath. "I'm going to get the guys together. Hang in there, Evie. This isn't going to be cheap." I hung up the phone and sat there, staring out the kitchen window at the street. The traffic seemed normal, but nothing was the same. I felt a twinge in my arm, more from the shock than from the force of the blow. Every minute passed more slowly. The sound of cars and children playing on the sidewalk no longer seemed so familiar. In that moment, I knew that Riverstone would never be the same again. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The next morning, before 7 o'clock, the sound of engines began to echo through downtown Riverstone. It wasn't just any motorcycle noise. It was different, deeper, and more pronounced, as if each rotation announced a change that was impossible to ignore. The echo came from the direction of Highway 26 and soon spread out along Main Street. From the garage door, I counted at least 50 motorcycles parked in a line, taking up almost the entire block between Clarice's Bakery and Mr. Levin's post office. They were men and women in black jackets, some wearing caps, others wearing helmets with stickers from old battles. I saw Frank, Steel Frank, getting off the first motorcycle, riding in the middle of the group without rushing, with that expression of someone who is ready for anything and doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. He came straight to me without having to say anything. He squeezed my arm carefully, looked at my bandaged elbow, and simply asked, "How are you holding up?" I said I was fine, but I didn't want to talk about it. I looked around. I recognized the faces of old airbase companions, people I never imagined seeing together again. The impact of their arrival was immediate. The people from the market went out onto the sidewalk. Mrs. Ruth dropped her scissors in the middle of cutting. Even the mayor appeared on the other side of the street, with that look on his face that made him unsure whether to thank them or pretend nothing was happening. The children stood at the window on the second floor of the office, trying to count how many motorcycles there were in total. The shadow vipers, which always drove slowly just to mark their territory, didn't even pass by the square this time. One or two watched from afar, but no one dared to come near the group. The mood in the city changed in a matter of minutes, as if, after so much time feeling alone, Riverstone suddenly had a defense that was impossible to ignore. Frank organized the veterans into pairs, placing each pair at strategic points around town. The drugstore, the market, Miller's grocery, the bakery, and even Mr. Levin's stand all received attention. He quickly explained how each pair should act, keep moving, talking to the shopkeepers, and keeping an eye on their surroundings, but without seeming provocative. It was about protection, not confrontation. Early that afternoon, I went to the garage and found two of them checking to see if the door locks were working. They showed me how to reinforce the lock with a steel rod and gave me a portable radio, a simple model like the ones used in war, with a range of a little over a kilometer. They explained how to tune in to the emergency frequency if I noticed any strange activity near the warehouse in the back. At the Main Street Market, the business was busier than on any other Friday when there was a sale. Mrs. Clarice started baking more bread than usual, and customers made a point of greeting the veterans with a handshake or a hot cup of coffee. I noticed how, within a few hours, the atmosphere of fear was replaced by something different. People were making eye contact again, laughing, and even teenagers were hanging out on the corner after school. At the bakery, Frank talked to the mayor, and together they agreed that the city would pay for the fuel costs for the motorcycles as long as necessary. With each new group of veterans that arrived, the city gained momentum. Late in the afternoon, I sat on a bench in the square in front of the war memorial. I watched how each veteran acted, always alert, but also joking, telling old stories to whoever would listen. I saw Mrs. Ruth's expression soften, and I saw Mr. Levin leave the stand open until later. It was as if, suddenly, everyone remembered how good it is to walk around the city without having to look back all the time. The shadow vipers continued to prowl, but avoided any contact. One of them rode past the market on his motorcycle, looked at the group of veterans, and then sped off. Fear changed sides. For the first time since the gang had arrived, Riverstone seemed to have found a way to take a deep breath. It wasn't the end of the problem yet, but the silence that night was different, full of hope, as if something new was about to begin. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. The illusion of safety didn't last long. 2 days after the veterans arrived, the smell of smoke woke half of Riverstone before 5 in the morning. I opened the kitchen window and saw a flash of light coming from the intersection of Main Street and Cedar Road. I ran outside in my slippers and coat without thinking. Mason's Hardware, a store that had been around since 1956, was on fire. The tin roof had already collapsed and flames were shooting out the windows. The fire truck's sirens blared down the street, but it was no use. The heat was so intense that no one could get close. I stood across the street, my face growing hot, watching the work of 3 generations disappear in less than half an hour. When the fire finally died down, the store floor was a carpet of ash. Mr. Mason, now in his 70s, stood there, staring at the remains. The portable radio in my hand shook with interference, everyone talking at once. Frank walked past me, telling me he needed to check on Diana's diner, 2 blocks away. I followed, without thinking much. When we turned the corner, all we could see was smoke billowing out of the diner's door. Diana was sitting on the sidewalk, her face covered in soot and her eyes wide open. I tried to talk to her, but she wouldn't listen. The smell of burning grease and melted plastic was suffocating. The police showed up in less than 10 minutes, but there wasn't much they could do. The gas station owner, the same one who had witnessed the Reaper's attack without reacting, just shook his head, saying he had never seen anything like it. Sergeant Miller gathered the residents to give an emergency warning, explaining that, starting that night, the curfew would be at 8 o'clock. No one argued, they just accepted it. Fear took over. Even with 50 veterans watching the city, it was clear that the Shadow Vipers were ready for anything. The veterans began to make hourly patrols, always with their radios in their pockets, but they knew it was impossible to cover every street at the same time. I felt a mixture of anger, helplessness, and guilt. I wondered if I had caused this, if I was responsible for what was happening. The weight of every decision I had made since that call to Frank tightened my chest. The radio was on the whole time, but Frank's voice sounded increasingly weary. He started to suggest that maybe it would be better to back off, that the city didn't have to pay for something that had started with an attack on me. I couldn't respond right away. I went home, locked myself in my room, and looked at my mother's pocket watch again. Memories of Vietnam came flooding back. The smoke from the downed helicopters, the smell of burning oil, the feeling that at any moment it could all end. I felt my stomach churn, a pressure that was hard to explain. I lay awake for hours, listening to the sound of sirens passing by in the distance, trying to decide if it was worth it to keep pushing. By late afternoon, I realized that I wasn't the only one feeling the tension. The mood on the streets had changed again. Neighbors began to gather in small groups, whispering outside their homes. The teenagers disappeared from the square, and even the pastor at the church announced that Sunday Mass would not be held until the morning. Some residents began talking about leaving the city, at least until the situation calmed down. I could feel doubt growing among the veterans. It wasn't just fear of the Vipers, it was fear that nothing would ever go back to normal. The worst part was when I found out that Reaper was going further. In less than a week, he had met twice with out-of-towners, guys no one knew, but who had a bad reputation in neighboring towns. Someone in line at the bank mentioned that they had seen drug dealers going into the old warehouse on Cedar Road. A black pickup truck with no license plates had been parked for 2 nights in a row near City Hall. No one could write down the make and model, but everyone knew they weren't locals. Frank gathered the veterans in the workshop around the tool table. The radio was tuned to the police frequency as he explained what was happening. They're bringing in people from the outside. Mercenaries, maybe even a cartel. We're not just dealing with troublemaking bikers anymore, he said. His face was tired, his beard unkempt. They decided to step up patrols, set up patrols on street corners, and create a list of contacts to alert anyone who noticed any strange activity. I started sleeping with my outdoor clothes next to my bed, just in case I needed to act quickly. Every time someone knocked on the door at night, my palms would sweat. One night, I heard footsteps on the sidewalk and waited, breathless, until I realized it was just one of the veterans changing spots. I found myself wondering if fear ever really goes away or if we just learn to cope with it. But it wasn't time to give up yet. What came next changed even those who thought they had seen it all. The idea of retreating was never an option for me. The morning after the Diana's Diner fire, I woke up before 5:30, made a strong coffee, and stared out the kitchen window at the square. Instead of thinking about running away, I decided that I wasn't going to let the city go up in smoke like that. I grabbed a pad of paper, wrote quickly, and at 6 o'clock sharp, I started knocking on doors, calling neighbors to an urgent meeting at 7. I didn't have a speech ready, just a huge desire to do something. The central square slowly filled up. I saw Mr. Mason, Diana, the people from Miller's grocery store, and even Mrs. Ruth came out of the beauty salon with her apron stained with paint. Frank came up to me without saying anything. He just stood there, a sign that he was there. I spoke directly, without beating around the bush. I told everyone what everyone already knew, but didn't have the courage to admit out loud. If we didn't react, there would be nothing left. I said that everyone there had already lost more than they should have. He said that rebuilding Mason's hardware and Diana's diner wasn't just a matter of money. It was about proving that Riverstone wouldn't accept being wiped off the map. I didn't ask for permission or wait for anyone's opinion. I said that in 24 hours, that store and restaurant would be back on their feet, even if it had to be improvised, even if it didn't have to be finished. I asked for donations of materials, time, and strength. At first, many people looked at me in disbelief. The silence seemed like a test, until Mr. Levin, who never leaves his stand before noon, raised his hand and said that he had boards stored in the warehouse. Mrs. Clarice offered bread and coffee to anyone who helped, and Diana, even with red eyes, promised to make lunch for everyone who got their hands dirty. The veterans divided up the tasks, as they had done in the old missions. Frank coordinated security, sending pairs of people to patrol the most sensitive areas of the city. The portable radio was distributed to residents who had cell phones, using apps to turn each phone into a rapid alert center. While one group built walls, another took care of the electrical installation with the few wires that remained from the fire. Even the teenagers, who had disappeared from the streets in recent days, showed up to paint the walls and replace the windows. By the end of that afternoon, Mason's store had a new structure. The doors were still temporary, made of plywood, but they were still standing. The smell of paint mixed with that of fresh bread, and seeing Diana serving coffee behind a makeshift counter gave me a feeling of victory that was hard to describe. For the first time in weeks, I heard real laughter. The veterans, accustomed to following orders, found the same discipline and will to not give in the residence. They organized guard shifts, distributed radios, and taught basic self-defense techniques to those who had never been anywhere near a risky situation. They showed how to identify easy access points to the business, how to reinforce doors with rebar, and even tricks to disguise makeshift cameras with old cell phones. When the sun went down, I gathered the main group at the corner of Cedar Road, where the old furniture factory that had been abandoned since 2006 was located. I negotiated with the owner over the phone, explaining that we didn't have much money, just that we needed a safe space. He agreed to rent it for a nominal fee, saying that it was better to have people occupying it than to see the building fall down completely. The veterans did a quick inspection, installed locks, used steel plates to secure the windows, and created a rotation scheme to keep the place occupied at all times. Little by little, the conversation stopped being about fear and started to be about what each person could do. Mrs. Ruth suggested creating a messaging group to report any strange activity. Mr. Mason organized a collective stockpile of tools, and even the mayor got involved to ensure that the city government helped with the removal of debris. Frank kept everyone informed on the radio, using simple codes to report any news. The group became a real community, capable of reacting quickly, and, most importantly, no longer accepting the status of victim. Every small step forward was celebrated. Every night without incident was a reason to be thankful. No one knew what the next day would bring, but standing there under the yellow lights of the factory hall, I felt that Riverstone had changed its status. It was no longer just a town of veterans. It was the place where, for the first time, people had decided to fight for themselves. But the price for that decision was yet to come, and the danger was only changing its face. It was a Friday night, with the city center already empty and the air colder than usual for late September, when everything got out of control. On the radio, the veterans exchanged short messages, almost always just the necessary. Position, normal situation, group of 3 approaching, nothing new. The routine had become a code of survival. But that night, around 10 p.m., Frank called me on the radio. "Evie, stay alert. We've detected suspicious movement near the factory. It seems they're not alone." It didn't take 5 minutes for the power to go out in the block. The factory plunged into darkness, with only the light from the flashlight hanging from my waist helping me see down the hallway to the main room. There were too many people outside to pretend it was just vandalism. The sound of footsteps was muffled, but I could hear at least 8 different voices speaking softly, mixed with a thick accent in English. The radio picked up the hiss of an alert coming from the square. Someone had jumped the fence of the warehouse across the street. I hid behind a pile of boards and listened to the creak of wood being forced apart. In the darkness, each noise seemed louder. I felt sweat dripping down my back, my eyes searching for any shadows that might indicate danger. The deal with Frank was simple. If the radio lost signal, I was to run to the back of the factory where the emergency entrance was unlocked. But before I could move, the front door was slammed open, flashlights sweeping the room. Reaper entered first, holding a pistol, with 2 men close behind. He shouted my name, telling me the game was over. I tried not to react, just moving slightly, as you learn when you need to stay out of range. The sound of metal hitting the floor made me freeze. One of them dropped a magazine, tripping over a pile of cans. The group spread out across the warehouse, but they didn't expect the veterans' reaction. As soon as the radio started working again, Frank activated the agreed signal. In less than 2 minutes, the side doors opened and the city police, along with 2 DEA agents, entered with guns drawn. The shootout lasted less than I expected, because the mercenaries were more concerned with running away than fighting. Rex, the Viper lieutenant, tried to negotiate a surrender, but Reaper lost control, pointing his gun at him. In the midst of the confusion, one of the drug dealers tried to run to the back of the warehouse, but was surrounded by 2 veterans and held down on the ground. Just when I thought it was over, I heard over the radio, "Attention, suspicious package downtown." The code was clear: explosives. I ran down the dark street, feeling the weight of each step. When I reached the square, I saw Reaper trying to plant C4 explosives at the base of the memorial statue, shouting that this city would never be the same again. Rex appeared behind him, gun in hand, hesitating. Reaper ordered him to detonate the explosive, threatening the group. In that second, Rex turned the gun and shot Reaper straight at his hand, sending the detonator flying away. The silence after the shot was tense. Reaper fell to his knees, screaming, but the police acted quickly, handcuffing him before anyone could get close. The square was lit up with patrol cars, red and blue lights flashing as the DEA gathered evidence and arrested everyone involved. Residents emerged from their homes, approaching slowly, as if they still needed permission to believe what they were seeing. Frank stood beside me, not saying a word, just watching the agents work. Standing there, under the cold light of the flashlights and the smell of gunpowder in the air, I knew that Riverstone would never be the same again. But at that moment, I felt only relief until the sound of one of the radios indicated that not everything was resolved. In the early hours after the confrontation, Riverstone looked like a different city. The vehicles remained until dawn, but there was no more rushing about or urgent sirens. For the first time in months, the silence on the streets was comfortable, not threatening. The smell of smoke and gunpowder gave way to the aroma of freshly baked bread coming from Clarice's bakery, which had opened early that Saturday to serve free coffee to passers-by. Word of the arrests spread quickly. Reaper and the cartel were at the Fairmont police station, and even newspapers from neighboring towns began to appear looking for details. When the sun came up, many people gathered in the square, not to protest or complain, but to decide what to do with the ruins that remained. There was no speech or formal ceremony. Mr. Mason was wearing gloves and carrying planks before 7 o'clock. Diana was already mixing cement in a bucket borrowed from the workshop. The group of veterans split up. Half worked on the construction site and half helped the police organize the belongings seized from the warehouse. Frank moved around, supervising without having to give orders, just making sure no one went too fast or forgot to eat. For the first time, I saw the ex-Vipers approaching slowly, without their leather uniforms, their faces marked by fatigue and regret. No one forced them, but they were invited to get down to business. Tyler, who had been roaming around on his motorcycle for weeks, carried boxes alongside the church pastor. And Brian, always aloof, spent an entire morning painting the walls of the market, receiving instructions from Mason himself, who never liked small talk, but knew how to recognize honest effort. At first, the residents didn't know how to deal with it. Some didn't like seeing the old Vipers mixed in with the rest of the city. But little by little, the distrust turned into coexistence. The church group organized a community effort to rebuild the damaged houses, and the city announced a rehabilitation program, funding technical courses and offering jobs to those who wanted to get out of crime. Those who accepted got started right away, helping to rebuild the baseball field fence, cleaning streets, and replacing broken windows. The program was called New Beginning, and it soon attracted the attention of a state news team. When they came to interview me, I tried to refuse, saying I had little to say. But they insisted. I only accepted because I thought that perhaps someone from the outside could learn from the mistakes and successes of the place. It didn't take long for Riverstone to make headlines in more than one major newspaper. Reporters wanted to understand how a small town had fought back against the cartel, welcomed former criminals, and turned things around. The mayor was even invited to speak at a conference on public safety. Veterans took turns giving interviews, but no one wanted the spotlight. Frank spoke little and was direct, thanking the community for its support. I avoided almost all public appearances. I continued with my routine, the workshop, the grocery store, the simple tasks that kept me busy and reminded me of what was important. Sometimes I would stop in the square and see, from afar, the old Vipers mingling with the rest of the residents, some laughing, others focused on their work, all of them seemingly seeking some kind of peace. I saw children playing near the memorial, without fear, as if all the tension had finally dissolved. The radio, which had been on 24 hours a day for months, now broadcast only music and good news. The church was packed the following Sunday, and the pastor spoke about forgiveness, not in a sermon-like tone, but as someone who knows that people can change. I sensed that many of the people there were hearing those words for the first time and had a real desire to start over. I never sought recognition, nor did I want my name to become a symbol of anything, but letters, notes, and invitations began to arrive. I always responded with thanks, but avoided exposure. I received an award from the city council, a framed photo of my old helicopter next to a letter signed by all the residents. I kept it in the back of my closet, along with my mother's medals and watch. I preferred to continue on my own path, listening, helping, trying not to judge. I understood that courage is not about noise or medals, but about the daily decision not to turn your back on those in need, even when no one is looking. Riverstone became a reference, not because it defeated a gang, but because it learned to embrace those who made mistakes and give a chance to those who wanted to do the right thing. In the end, that's what saved the city, and me too. On September 22nd of the following year, Riverstone Square was packed like never before. The Strength for Unity Memorial was unveiled right in the center of town, where before there had been only an unkempt flower bed and a broken bench. There were no long speeches or rehearsed tributes. The names of each person who helped were engraved on a bronze plaque, but what really caught the eye was seeing the former Vipers side by side with the residents, helping to erect the final pieces of the monument. Logan, who had come to town years earlier as a mercenary without direction, asked to be part of the Veterans Guard. No one was surprised. He showed up at the ceremony with a clean jacket, greeted the veterans, was introduced by Frank himself, and from then on, he never missed the team's weekly meetings. The whole town participated. Children running around the square, old acquaintances swapping stories about that night when everything changed. Mrs. Ruth serving lemon cake and coffee until the sun began to set. It was there that I truly understood what it means to rebuild. Not just walls and storefronts, but also trust, respect, and the right of each person to start over. I saw families once again occupying public spaces, teenagers once again chatting on the steps of the city hall, and, most importantly, I realized that all the fear that had held the city back no longer had any place. Riverstone had become a point of reference, but no one there felt like a hero. The past was left behind, not forgotten, but transformed into a living lesson for everyone who passed by. When I left the square that late afternoon, I made a point of walking slowly, paying attention to every detail. The lights on in the market, the smell of bread coming out of the bakery, the sound of church bells marking the beginning of the night. No one looked back anymore, expecting the worst. Now it's up to you. Answer in the comments. What would be your attitude towards all this? Would you have the courage to forgive and help rebuild? Or would you continue looking to the past? Right now, I want to see who faces the truth head on. This story has left an impression on you. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here, each story reveals how capable we are of surviving the impossible and transforming pain into hope. You are part of this community, and every detail experienced here will accompany you in the next stories. Keep following real stories that challenge human limits. Subscribe now and don't miss the next chapter. What happened in Riverstone was already astonishing, but what you're about to see defies everything we thought we knew about the impossible. The next video is now live. Click and watch now.